Installing Visual Studio 2017 for Mac on the Mac is very similar to installing Visual Studio 2017 on the PC, which we looked at in the previous video. The system requirements on the Mac is that you're running Sierra 10.12 operating system or higher. That would also include High Sierra, would be a higher option for you. If you're taking our iOS cohort, you probably should install Xcode 9.4.1, or may already have that installed. That's the version we're running in our classroom, so you want to be compatible with what we have on campus, ideally, if you're doing iOS development with Xcode. For Xamarin, though, I recommend that you have the most recent version of Xcode, which is 10.1. If you're not taking the iOS cohort, I would go ahead and install the latest. You can do that from the App Store. However, if you have the older version and you want to have both of them, that is an option, and I will show you how to install both. You can run multiple versions of Xcode on your Mac. And then, of course, you're going to need to install Visual Studio 2017 for Mac. So you will want to have an Apple ID, and you can get your Apple ID if you don't have one by going to appleid.apple.com. You will need your Apple ID when logging into both Xcode and Visual Studio 2017. If you want to create apps and distribute them on the Apple Store, you will need an Apple Developer's License, and that runs $99 a year. That is not required for this course. And if you want to be able to install and test your creations on your own iPhone or iPad, you also need an Apple Developer's License. However, to sideload that onto your own device, cabling your device to your Mac, you can do that with a free developer's license. You just cannot put things up in the store and distribute them. You can test on up to 100 devices a year. And then, of course, you're going to need Xcode. I'll show you how to do multiple installations. And then we'll look at installing Visual Studio 2017 for Mac and how to configure that with the SDKs and put in your author information. So the first thing you need to do is set up an Apple ID if you don't already have one. If you already have one, you can use your existing Apple ID. But to create one up, you're going to go to appleid.apple.com, and there is a link here on the top right that says Create Your Apple ID. You can click that, and you're going to provide some information, and they will assign you an Apple ID. You will need that ID in logging into Xcode as well as to Visual Studio. To obtain an Apple developer license, you can go to developer.apple.com/programs. You can read about the program here, including how it works, and there's an enroll button. You can enroll, pay your $99 and get your Apple developer license, which gives you the right to upload stuff into the store. However, everything you upload to the store has to be vetted by Apple, so you have to meet all of their requirements. We cover a lot of that in the iOS cohort classes in terms of the design. We'll cover that a little bit in the Xamarin class, but I'm basically just going to direct you to the human interface guideline that Apple puts out that directs you what kind of fonts to use, colors, design, so forth. If your app does not meet their standards, it will be rejected. If you want to get the free developer license, there's a video in YouTube that will walk you through that. Here is the URL on how to get there. That will give you the right to be able to install and test your apps on your own device, but you cannot put things up into the store. If you don't have Xcode, you can install it on your Mac by going to the App Store and searching for Xcode. You can also update your version of Xcode here as well. If you click on Xcode, you'll have an option to get it. However, if you want to install multiple versions of Xcode, you can download and install previous or newer versions of Xcode by going to the developer page of the apple.com website. So it's developer.apple.com. And you'll find, if you scroll on the bottom, you'll find a link to download, or you can use the URL of developer.apple.com/download/more. On the more page, I would search for Xcode. Probably uncheck everything but developer tools. And then the most recent one is Xcode 10. So you can click on that, and then you can choose to download the zip file, xzip file, It's XIP. This is a secure zip that makes sure it hasn't been hacked, no viruses, that sort of thing. Once you download that, we want to go to Downloads. And here's my zip file. I can expand that by double-clicking on it. It'll take a few minutes to expand. Okay, so now here in my Downloads folder, I have the expanded version of Xcode. Now remember, this is my 10.1. I already have 9.4.1 installed. I'd like to have them both installed. So to differentiate between the two, I'm simply going to come in here and rename this one as Xcode 10.1. Then I'm going to install this into the applications. I'm going to have another instance of the Finder open. And all I'm going to do, so here's my applications folder. From the downloads, I'm simply going to take Xcode and drag it into the applications folder. I've already done that, and you see down here I have Xcode, that's my 9.4.1, and I have Xcode 10.1. I have both of them down here on my application bar. The first one is simply Xcode, and that one is Xcode 10.1. So I can differentiate between the two. So next I want to launch Xcode. On the menu bar, I'm going to go to Xcode, Preferences, add your Apple ID here by clicking the plus sign, providing the information that is necessary. You can have multiple Apple IDs. I happen to have 3 different ones, depending on the organization I'm working with. Once you've done that, you can then quit Xcode. The next step is to install Visual Studio for Mac. And you can get there using the URL visualstudio.microsoft.com/vs/Mac, VS for Visual Studio. And there's a button here simply to download it. Click that. It's going to put it in your downloads folder, and then you'll want to expand that and run the installer. If you already have Visual Studio installed, or as you're installing Visual Studio, you'll be given the chance to choose what components you want to have. You can run the Visual Studio installer for Mac from your downloads folder. If you already have it installed, you can also open it back up and look at the options. So I'm going to click Install Visual Studio for Mac. I'm going to trust the image. Here then is the installer. I'm going to continue. And here's where you can choose the components. You're going to have the Android and the iOS and the .NET Core installed. You can install the Mac OS option. That's if you want to create things for the Macintosh desktop. And as I mentioned in the previous video, I would probably install the workbooks, even though they primarily refer to working with Android or iOS individually rather than Xamarin.Forms. I think they're still helpful to work through. Once you have that all created, just click Done and it will install. Again, it's going to take a little while, so go grab some lunch and come back. Now that Visual Studio for Mac is installed, we're going to open it up and we're going to go to the Preferences option under Visual Studio. Here is where you can set up the different versions of Android. In each of these, you're going to want the Android SDK and I would say the Google APIs. I would do the most recent ones from 6 on, depending on the emulator you want to work with. These would be APIs 23 through 28. Once you choose which options you want, then you're going to click the OK button. And again, this will take a little bit of time to install. After you've done that, come back into Preferences again. And this time we're going to go to Apple, and we're going to set up which version of Xcode we want to use. So right now, mine is set up for 9.4.1. I want to use that 10.0. So I'm going to come into my Applications folder. And I'm going to find the Xcode 10.1, say Open. That will now be my specified location for the Xcode. And they then say you should restart Visual Studio. Once again, I'm going to go to Preferences. I'm going to go to the Apple Developer Accounts and make sure you choose your account. And I'm going to click OK. So in the next video, we'll look at how to create a simple Xamarin application here in Visual Studio for the Mac for both Android and iOS and test those in the emulators. And then we'll go back on the video after that and look at how to connect our PC and our Mac and do basically the same project on the PC side for Android, iOS, and Universal Windows.